Joe Rochefort's War, the Odyssey of the Codebreaker who outwitted Yamamoto at Midway, by Elliot Carlson. Narrated by Danny Campbell. Copyright 2011 by Elliot Carlson. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Naval Institute Press and was produced in the year 2012 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. To Commander Joe Rochefort must forever go the acclaim for having made more difference at a more important time than any other naval officer in history. Captain Edward L. Beach, U.S. Navy, retired. The United States Navy, 200 years. Forward. This book is an account that is long overdue. Joseph J. Rochefort was a singular player on the world scene in the early months of the Second World War, but his major accomplishments at that time became buried in a cloak of security and unjustified criticism. Chief among his achievements was the crucial role he played in the stunning American victory in the Battle of Midway, although his contribution would remain unappreciated for decades, even after his death. As a Naval Reserve ensign, I was an analyst assigned to Rochefort's Combat Intelligence Unit, CIU, at Pearl Harbor in February 1942, and I can attest to the validity of both his stellar successes then, as well as his occasional questionable actions. Joe Rochefort was a complicated naval officer in a manner that can be properly understood only by looking at his entire life, now revealed for the first time in this book. From humble beginnings, he was attracted to the Navy in the immediate aftermath of World War I. He enlisted at the age of 17, thanks to a little imagination regarding his date of birth. His enlisted service demonstrated that he possessed latent intellect and capabilities that ultimately led to an officer's commission without the benefit of having graduated from the Naval Academy. As the reader will see, some of that background served to haunt him for much of his career, despite his brilliant service to the Navy and the nation. The highlight of Rochefort's career was his amazing thoroughness in identifying, interpreting, and reporting to Admiral Chester W. Nimitz the Japanese plans to assault and capture Midway Atoll. The enemy saw Midway as the first step in defeating the U.S. fleet and eventually removing the threat of the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. That Rochefort provided such critical intelligence accurately and in time for Admiral Nimitz to organize and deploy a credible defense made the difference between our forces participating in the Battle of Midway and not even knowing that the Japanese were headed there. Clearly, Rochefort's work enabled the victory at Midway, but his contribution to the battle, as well as the impact on history of the battle itself, are still being debated today. Rochefort's detractors outnumbered his supporters, and they held higher positions in the Navy's hierarchy, resulting in occasionally unjust treatment as the years and his career progressed. But he never displayed any sense of defeat or disappointment over the consequences of such treatment. His first loyalty was to the Navy, and he accepted his fate as it arose, continuing to carry out his duties with enthusiasm and distinction wherever he was assigned. In all respects, he was a leader who was held in high regard by his subordinates. I'm honored to have been included among them. My experiences during that early and critical period of the war are clearly the most memorable of my 42 years of service to the intelligence arms of the Navy and the federal government. Although my personal contact with Commander Rochefort was limited at the time, I had an opportunity to observe him on a daily basis. Plus, I was able to learn more about him from his friend and former fleet intelligence officer, Edwin Layton. I still regard Rochefort, Layton, and Jasper Holmes, one of Rochefort's top analysts at the CIU, as my primary mentors, and the ones who most influenced my decision for a career in naval intelligence. As you will hear toward the end of this book, a great American president cited Rochefort for inclusion among a few who individually made a difference in the outcome of a history-changing battle. That puts him in lofty company, with men like Themistocles at Salamis, Admiral de Grasse in the Chesapeake Bay, and Colonel Joshua Chamberlain at Little Round Top. But Rochefort stands out even among that noble company, for he achieved his triumph without ever firing a shot, or even coming within sight of the enemy. With the long-suppressed facts of his life masterfully revealed on these pages by Elliot Carlson, the full and factual story of Joseph Rochefort can now be known. Rear Admiral Donald Mack Showers, U.S. Navy, retired. Introduction. The Riddle of Joe Rochefort. Rochefort is caustic, witty, unorthodox, tactless, intolerant, blunt but quick, intimate, and brilliant. Walter Lord. In spring 1942, Commander Joe Rochefort, America's lead cryptanalyst at Pearl Harbor, appeared to be one of the rising stars in the U.S. Navy. Just about everybody who knew this bright, sharp-edged, competent officer believed he was headed for the highest rungs on the Navy ladder, almost certainly flag rank. It was just a matter of time. Rochefort himself had every reason to feel confident about the direction of his Navy career. He had just earned the gratitude of Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Fleet, for his role in the Battle of Midway, which lasted June 4th through 7th. Rochefort headed the unusual group of codebreakers that had cracked the Imperial Japanese Navy's operational code just prior to the battle. That coup fixed the two small islands of the Midway Atoll as the probable target of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's impending campaign in the Central Pacific. Not all Navy leaders accepted Rochefort's forecast. Many in Washington, along with some of the U.S. Army's top brass, flatly rejected it, doubting Yamamoto would amass so large a force to seize a mere atoll of dubious strategic value. But Nimitz went along with Rochefort. He put his carriers in a place where they could surprise the sizable Japanese armada bearing down on Midway. They did so and achieved a stunning naval victory, an outcome that, some writers maintained, turned the tide of war against Japan in the Pacific. Nimitz credited Rochefort in part for that success, and recommended him for a Distinguished Service Medal, DSM. But in the summer and fall of 1942, something happened to Rochefort's career. Late in June, for reasons that didn't seem clear, Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Fleet, denied Rochefort the DSM. 4 months later, in October, King approved a plan shaped by Rochefort's Washington bosses, Rear Admiral Joseph Redmond and his brother, Captain John Redmond, to oust Rochefort from his job running the Navy's code-breaking unit at Pearl. Suddenly, Rochefort was gone. Many people wondered what had happened to him. Members of his decrypt team were especially puzzled. They couldn't square the news of his expulsion with the Joe Rochefort they had served for 17 months in a dank basement at Pearl, the top-secret hideaway where they carried out their code-breaking effort. In that stuffy and frequently chilly haunt, they had come to know Rochefort as an exceptional individual, a tall, slender, taciturn officer who spoke quietly but knowingly, radiating authority and his own distinct brand of bemused seriousness. People liked being around him to soak up his smarts. True, he had his peculiarities, chief among them a capacity for irreverence, sarcasm, and blunt speech that astonished even his closest friends. Still, given his quick mind, obvious leadership abilities, and masterful performance during the weeks leading up to Midway, they regarded him as an officer on the way up, certainly not a candidate for misfortune. There did not seem to be an explanation for what had happened. From what Rochefort's friends believed, and even Rochefort himself, Admiral King had been influenced by officers around him who were part of an anti-Rochefort cabal, led by the Redmond brothers. They had clashed with Rochefort over Japan's target before the Battle of Midway, and were said to be motivated